ever get a package, with no label. And you're like, what's even in here, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what it feels like when you run into a lack of transparency.
Yeah.
So today we're diving deep into what transparency really means. And not just in business, but like everywhere.
Yeah, it really does feel like that, like a mystery box, kind of. And transparency, it seems simple on the surface, but it goes way deeper than just like showing your cards. So we're going to explore all the different sides of it, how it plays out with consumers, inside companies, with their employees, and even, with investors.
And for this deep dive, we're using Chapter 5 of Formula G
Yeah.
as our guide. Now, this is a business book, but we're pulling out the good stuff, the stuff that applies to you, no matter what you do.
Exactly. By the end of this, you'll be Transparency Pro.
Exactly. So first things first, what is transparency? Formula G uses this great analogy about buying a used car. You wouldn't just take the seller's word for it, right?
Right. You'd want to peek under the hood, take it for a test drive, kick the tires a bit, maybe. It's the same in business, really. Consumers want to know what's in their food, how it's made. Employees want to be in the loop when decisions are made. And investors, well, they need clarity before they put down their money.
Yeah, it's about seeing the full picture before you commit to anything. And Formula G makes this point that things have changed drastically. Like back in the day, businesses could operate in secrecy, no problem. But now,
it's a whole new ballgame. You've got consumer protection laws, online reviews, Yelp, anyone, and of course, social media. Power has shifted to the people for sure.
which means you, dear listener, you have more leverage than ever before. But it also means you've got to be savvy. You need to be able to spot genuine transparency.
100%. And that's what we're here to help you with. So let's dive into how this all affects consumers directly. Formula G shares some stats that are kind of mind-blowing, honestly. Like, get this, 94% of consumers say they're more loyal to brands that are totally transparent.
94%.
Yeah.
That's almost everyone. And get this, 73% would even pay more for a product that's completely transparent. This isn't just like a nice to have anymore. This is something people are willing to shell out for.
And it makes sense when you think about it. Transparency gives you that feeling of control. You're not being tricked. You're making informed choices.
Yeah.
Because you have all the information.
Yeah, it's like it builds a relationship, not just a transaction. Instead of being told what to buy, you feel like you're part of the decision. And that feeling of being in the loop, that builds trust and loyalty.
Exactly. And businesses are realizing that long-term trust and loyalty, it's way more valuable than any quick wins they might get from,
Yeah.
being shady.
Speaking of trust, Formula G talks about internal transparency too.
Yeah.
So that's openness within a company, between management and employees. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Definitely. They have this case study about Buffer, the social media company. And get this, they made all of their salaries public.
Hold on, all of them. Like they shared their secret sauce. That's a level of transparency I hadn't seen before.
And not just the numbers. They shared the actual formula they used to calculate them.
Wow, that's a bold move.
It was a huge gamble, and it sparked a ton of debate. But you can't deny the effect it had on Buffer's culture. Their employees felt way more engaged. There was a real sense of fairness. And office politics, they kind of just disappeared because there was no need for all that speculation.
Wow, imagine the trust that built within that company. It really shows how transparency can create a much healthier and more productive work environment.
No doubt about it. Yeah, I mean, obviously not every company's ready to pull a Buffer and go full public with salaries. But the principle, right, the principle is what matters. It's about having that open communication where employees feel informed, like their opinions are actually valued.
Right, like a we're all in this together kind of vibe. And Formula G points out, this isn't just about being nice. Internal transparency makes good business sense too. There are studies that show companies with high internal transparency, they often have more engaged and productive employees.
Yeah, for sure. It makes sense, right? When people feel trusted and respected, they're going to be more likely to go the extra mile, to really own their work.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about transparency with consumers and within companies. Now for a bit of a curveball, transparency with investors. You'd think businesses would want to hide their struggles, right? From the people funding them.
You'd think so, yeah. Like, you want to put your best foot forward. Hide the messy bits. But investors, they're not fooled that easily. They're looking for companies that are honest about the good and the bad.
It's like in any relationship, really. If you're always trying to seem perfect, it just erodes trust. But when you're open, even about the tough stuff, it strengthens the bond.
That's a great analogy. And Formula G backs this up with research. Studies show that companies that are more transparent with their investors, they actually tend to have higher valuations.
So being open about your challenges can actually make your company more attractive to investors. That's
Yeah.
counterintuitive, but fascinating.
It is, because transparency, it signals confidence and a willingness to be accountable. It shows you're not hiding anything, that you believe in open communication, even when things are tough.
All this talk about transparency, it makes me wonder, are there like specific tools or strategies that companies can use to become more transparent?
Formula G gets into that. And it's not about some magic formula or like a checklist you can pick off. It's about creating a culture of transparency that's woven into everything you do.
They do offer some practical tips though, right? Like holding regular meetings with employees and investors, sending out updates and newsletters, and creating open communication channels.
Right, but those tools, they're only as good as the intention behind them. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
So it's less about checking boxes and more about creating an environment where transparency is just like the norm, the company DNA.
Precisely. And to illustrate this, Formula G highlights this really inspiring example. Zappos, the online shoe retailer.
Ah, Zappos. They're famous for their amazing company culture. What's their transparency game like?
Well, get this. They have a whole department
Yeah,
dedicated to giving tours of their headquarters. They're literally opening their doors and showing people how they operate.
that's bold, letting people see behind the curtain. Who gets these tours? Just potential customers and employees?
Not just them, they even give vendors, their business partners, access to internal information.
Wow, that's a depth level of trust. They must
Yeah.
really believe in the power of transparency.
They do, and that trust, it's built on a foundation of like radical openness.
Yeah.
They believe that by being honest, they create stronger relationships with everyone they work with.
This reminds me of something Formula G calls the cat syndrome. They compare companies trying to hide things to a cat burying its waste. Even though everyone knows what's going on, it still tries to cover it up.
Ah, yeah, it's a funny image. But it makes a good point. Trying to hide things, it just breeds suspicion and distrust. But being open, even about the not so glamorous parts, that builds trust and respect.
So it's like the old saying, honesty is the best policy. But in today's world, it's not just ethical, it's good business strategy.
Exactly. And as Formula G emphasizes, transparency is a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing process.
It's like you got to keep working at it,
And
get better and better.
exactly. It's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Yeah.
And the payoff, huge. Formula G really sums it up well. Transparency builds trust, makes your brand look better, creates a healthier work environment, increases market value, helps you attract talent, improves communication, builds a stronger team, and it just makes everything clearer and more accountable.
Wow, that's quite a list of benefits. Seems like transparency is a win-win for everyone.
Absolutely. And it's only becoming more important as consumers have more choices, more information at their fingertips.
Whether you're running a business or just want to like improve your relationships, transparency is something to really think about.
I totally agree. And, if we zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture, it's really about creating a more ethical and sustainable way of doing business,
Ah.
leaving behind those old ways of secrecy and embracing openness and honesty.
Well said. Formula G definitely makes a compelling case for transparency. Any final thoughts for our listeners
Yeah.
before we wrap up this deep dive?
I'd encourage everyone listening to think about areas in their own Lydian lives where they could be more transparent. It might feel scary at first, but the rewards, that trust and genuine connection, so worth it.
That's a great takeaway. Transparency isn't just for businesses, it's a way of life and something we can all benefit from.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a finish line. Be kind to yourself and celebrate those small victories along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's it for our deep dive on transparency. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.